This is 9.3, the Pacific Theater of World War II. This is where we are really going to get the U.S. involved in the war. So let's take a look at Japan real quick. Japan wanted to create an empire, but they lacked raw materials and economic markets. If you look at them on a map, they are this little stretch of islands right here off the coast of Asia. So if you only control those islands, you have a very limited amount of natural resources. So this is where they need to move to other lands in order to benefit from their resources and their raw materials and markets. In 1937, Japan attacked China, and the U.S. placed an embargo on raw goods to Japan, so they are no longer going to trade with the Japanese. In 1940, Japan joined the Axis powers. Who are Axis powers right now? They are Germany and Italy. Now, Japan is led by a gentleman by the name of Hideki Tojo. He is the Japanese prime minister. He's called the Razor. He was known to be a ruthless man. He was the general of the Imperial Army. And he planned to get rid of the U.S. naval base in Hawaii. We talked about how Hawaii came into U.S. control, and how we really needed a station in the Pacific in order to refuel our Navy and to use it as essentially like a pit stop when we are traveling to Asia. All right. So the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. This attack on U.S. soil is what brings America into the war. So the U.S. suffers heavy losses. About 2,500 people are killed, and they lose a lot of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. But a lot of their Navy was actually still out in the Pacific and not even at Pearl Harbor yet. Congress declared war. It was a vote that ended in 388 against 1. Only one person voted against going to war. So let's talk about the Pacific Theater. When we call it the Pacific Theater, we are really talking about the Pacific Front, because World War II was fought in two completely different areas of the globe. We have the European front and the Pacific front. All right, so the U.S. strategy for the Pacific was a strategy called island hopping, a very popular method used by Douglas MacArthur. If you look at the map of the Pacific, there are a lot of island regions. So you can't fight a war like you can in Europe, where it's just one landmass and you can move across it. You have to jump from island to island and make your way across the Pacific. So they were able to bypass heavily fortified Japanese-held islands and blockade them using submarines. This rendered Japanese forces useless in the war. Then we get to the Battle of Midway in June of 1942. Navy codebreakers intercepted Japanese messages, and we were able to head them off and win an American victory against the Japanese. And after the Battle of Midway, Japan is now on the defensive rather than on the offensive, trying to begin attacks. They are just trying to fend off the U.S. forces at this point. This turned the tide of the Pacific Theater. You need to know that. Battle of Midway, turning point of the Pacific Theater. All right, we also get Iwo Jima. That happened March of 1945. This is one of the bloodiest battles of World War II. It lasted almost a month. few Japanese would even surrender, and it ended with about 25,000 U.S. casualties, but it was an Allied victory. If you see this picture up top, this is actually a monument in DC. It is actually really big, and if you ever go visit, you'll notice there are a set of extra hands. If you count the amount of hands on the flagpole versus the amount of soldiers, if you count them, there's actually one extra pair of hands, and there's all sorts of theories and ideas about why that is, but it's just an interesting fact. This is also where we get kamikazes. They are bomb-loaded planes whose pilots deliberately crashed into targets. So these are essentially suicide bombers for the Japanese. They will just fly into their enemy, hoping for victory of their country. The Manhattan Project was the code name for the atomic bomb project that was taking place in America. It was a weapon to be used in the Pacific Theater against Japan. The U.S. spent $2 billion to build the atomic bombs in a research center at Los Alamos. The U.S. bombed Hiroshima August 6, 1945. This was the first atomic bomb ever dropped, and this is when the world really saw what the U.S. was capable of militarily. 60,000 people were dead. And then in Nagasaki, August 9th, 1945, 3 days after, the second atomic bomb was dropped. And this resulted in 35,000 deaths. Now, instantaneous death is one thing, but there was also massive amounts of radiation sickness and disease and death following the events just because of how much radiation poison was being taken in by people of Japan. President Truman decides to use the bombs to save American lives. This idea of we will destroy the enemy and make the attack on Japanese soil and make them turn into themselves in order to protect the U.S. against further Japanese attacks. Japan surrenders on August 15th, 1945, very shortly after the bombings, and this is known as VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day. And this is when World War II is finally over.